be reading 3 stories from the Backwoods Creepy Reddit. And this video will be slightly different, a slightly different kind of narration. It will be a mixture of soft-spoken and whispering. But before I begin, I want to say thank you to these users on Reddit who allowed me to read their true stories. I will leave a link to their original post in the description below so that you can check them out. And yeah, let's get right into these stories. The first one is titled Creepy Encounter in Banff National Park, Alberta. Posted by the user myfox. This experience happened to me when my wife and I stayed in Banff National Park for the week back in September last year. We've always paid a visit to this beautiful landscape whenever we visit my folks in Calgary, Alberta. Although we didn't think we would have a paranormal experience this time around, we try to do excursions that we haven't done yet every time we make a visit. A mix of touristy things and not so touristy stuff. Near the end of our trip, we were scheduled to visit the cave and basin, which was a 7-minute bus ride from Banff town. We decided to go upon opening so that we could avoid the crowds and have lots of time to do other things on our list that day. A bit of info for those who haven't been to the cave and basin, or Banff for that matter. From what we read, it's kind of a museum where they show how Banff was rediscovered by Canadian railway workers back in 1883. Rediscovered because this national park was, and still is, a sacred land for Indigenous people. It has been like this for centuries before it was rediscovered. We came into the entrance of the tunnel to the cave where the railway workers are said to have dug through and discovered a large sulfur well. This sacred cave was used by Indigenous people as a place for healing. Going through the tunnels is dark, and its only light source is above the well itself, where the sunlight peeks through. It was quite eerie walking through the dark tunnel. I can hear whispers, even if we were the only ones going in. Then, something told my wife not to look into the water in the well. She said after that she may not have liked it if she looked down there. We didn't stay too long in the cave, as I started feeling claustrophobic, and the smell of sulfur is unbearable. My wife told me what she felt when we came out of it. I told her that I did not see anything, and I looked into the well myself. Little did I know at the time that this creepy experience wouldn't end here. Next, we continued the tour and made our way at the top of the building, where a bridge connects to the museum to the forest of Sulphur Mountain. As we crossed over, we saw a small cabin that served as lodging for the railway workers back then. We were right above the cave that we were just in about half an hour ago. The cabin was surrounded by a large forest ascending up to the mountain. And right when my wife was reading information about this cabin, I felt a dreadful feeling. A feeling I'm familiar with when there's a spirit or entity in the midst. It also felt like there's a number of people watching over us, even if it was just the both of us up there. As I looked from left my eyes were drawn to the tall trees at the far back, and there I saw a dark entity so massive and tall that it stood as tall as the trees beside it. Though I cannot see its face, I knew it was staring at us, as if guarding the area. It did not feel like a ghost, but a spirit or entity that felt so old, maybe as old as the forest itself. I felt like we weren't welcome here anymore. Then I motioned to my wife that we cut our time here, and we left with haste. It was only after that we left the grounds that I told my wife what we saw. Seeing an entity like that was understandable, knowing how sacred that place is for indigenous people. So whenever you get the chance to visit Banff or these national parks, learn the history, respect the land and its people, and the unseen guards. Thanks for reading. And that story was posted by myfox. This next story is titled My Experience in Pisgah National Forest, posted by the user thortastic. And this is how it goes. Weird things happen in the Appalachian Mountains. They're as old as time itself, and people who have lived there will always be the first to tell you that it can be otherworldly, and sometimes you just have to turn a blind eye for your own sanity, or just be like, yep, this is just how it is. I grew up in a small town outside of Pisgah National Forest. Lots of waterfalls, great hikes, beautiful views. It's an amazing place to be, especially in the summer. But what happened to me in the dead of winter, when I was about 17? Before I write all this, let me preface by saying that at this time, I had just gotten my first prescription for glasses and was still not used to keeping them on 24/7. But although my vision was blurry, I know something was there with me the day that this happened. When I was 17, I decided to do my senior project on nature photography. What better place to take some photos than the forest? So I asked my mother if she'd drive me into Pisgah and let me take some pictures as we winded through the woods. It was winter, so the trees were bare and the sky was gray. It was still a fairly pretty day, and I just wanted some pictures of the local flora. So my mom pulls over to let me walk down a trail I had been to hundreds of times. After a short little walk through the woods, you'd end up on a riverbank, a great swimming hole in the summer. And the way the bank curved, you could walk along the little stony shore, a little ways past the trail. But mind you, I was wearing a bright-colored orange raincoat, so I was incredibly visible. So I'm crouching down to take a picture of a cool old-ass railroad spike that had been sticking out of the earth for years. And all of a sudden, I realize that there's no noise. Like, scarily silent. No birds chirping, no nature sounds, nothing. It's like I didn't even hear the sound of the water flowing. As this is happening, I suddenly realize If you've experienced that primal sort of fear, you know what I mean. It was like alarm bells went off in my head, going, danger, danger. As I'm sitting there with this feeling washing over me, I start to hear crunching footsteps. Again, the trees were bare, so there wasn't any foliage to block any view. I hear these footsteps that sound like 2 feet get closer and closer to the river from the opposite side of the bank. And I'm watching very closely. I couldn't move. Whatever I saw was all gray and not a human, but tall and appeared to be on 2 legs. It was getting closer and closer, and right as it was about to reach the riverbank, I snapped out of my trance and turned and hightailed it. I have never been more scared or run that fast in my life. I booked it back to my mom's car and was obviously out of breath, so she asked me what happened. After I had explained to her, she looked very worried and said that while I had been down the trail, she got this weird sudden fear that something was wrong and was about to come and find me when I ran back. We left after that, and to this day, sometimes we'll talk about it, but with no real explanation. I've told my BF this story, and he insists it could have been a skinwalker. I have no idea what it was, and although I wish I had gotten a better look, I'm glad I ran away when I did. Has anyone experienced anything like this in a similar area? Or anywhere in general for that matter? And that's the end of that encounter. This next encounter is titled, I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska. Here's one of my stories, and it was posted by the user Clyde 2003. I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing quantities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and we're headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out for safety. No cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning. Not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow, as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles per hour, when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man in jeans driving down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and it was minus 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the card shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up right next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us and just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside of him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just gonna try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched on to my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude still had a hold on my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held on to my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, it could only have been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy, and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to go check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard and were told to head back to our camp. None of us wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing. Not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank, and that he'd get us for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened